We are ever so close to football season, less than a month away until the NFL's Hall of Fame game to kind of kick things off unofficially for the preseason. I thought I'd don my new Trey Hendrickson black Ravens jersey, the new ones that we just put out, because, I mean, these things are just slick looking. But this video is something that I've been wanting to do for a while, but didn't necessarily know when to do it or how to do it. But in the Ravens' history, which is spanning 31 years starting this year, they've been a part of 15 shutouts. That means there's either been 15 times or sometime during those 15 where the Ravens either finished a game with 0 points or their opponents finished a game with 0 points. But the thing is, the Ravens have only finished with 0 points in a game twice. So today we're going to take a look at those and the 13 times the Ravens have shut out their opponents. So editing me, correcting a mistake, it's actually 15 shutouts that the Ravens have had in their history, and they've been a part of 17, only being shut out twice. So sorry I miscounted, but there's a correction there. We're going to be going through all 15 of the times the Ravens have shut out their opponents, and the 2 times the Ravens have been shut out. Now, the first time the Ravens were ever part of a shutout came in prime time, Week 10 versus the Pittsburgh Steelers, their big division rival. This was just the Ravens' second ever primetime game, and unlike the first primetime game they had in 1996 against the Colts, where it was actually close, this game just, well, it didn't do well. It didn't start well for the Ravens. They lost this game 37-0, a game where Vinny Testaverde threw 3 interceptions. Eric Zaire came in and wasn't much better. They just couldn't do a lot of anything. The Steelers ran the ball down the Ravens' throats. And of the 2 shutouts, this is the worst shutout the Ravens have ever had happen to them, as it really hasn't even come close since then. But you fast forward Two years later, and the Ravens would record their first shutout in team history, as in Week 16 of 1999, the Baltimore Ravens at home beat the Cincinnati Bengals 22-0. Now, ironically, you're going to be seeing the Bengals on here quite a bit, but this was the Ravens' first shutout in their history, and it was huge. This got them their 4th straight win to get to 8-7, and although they were eliminated from playoff contention later that day, the Ravens just showed that they were going to be competitive in the future, and wouldn't you know it, the next year, they would go on to win the Super Bowl, and during that season they had 4 separate shutouts. The first one came in Week 1 in Pittsburgh against the Steelers. Now, it wasn't 37-0, but the Ravens beat the Steelers 16-0, doing just enough on offense, not turning the ball over, and stopping the Steelers' run game, having to let Kent Graham throw the ball, and again, the Steelers did little to nothing that whole game. Then the Ravens would have back-to-back weeks with a shutout, as in Week 4, they would shut out the Bengals 37-0. Again, here's the Bengals again. Second straight year we're shutting them out. We knocked Achilles Smith out. Scott Mitchell had to come in. He was awful. And Corey Dillon had just 9 rushing yards on 12 carries, if you weren't sure how good the 2000 Ravens defense was. But the very next week, Week 5 in Cleveland, the Ravens didn't even score a single touchdown. As a matter of fact, this was the first of 5 games in a row where the 2000 Ravens would fail to score a single touchdown in any of their games. But they somehow won 2, and this was one of them. They beat the Browns 12-0, and a not necessarily dominating victory. I mean, Tony Banks wasn't great passing the ball, although Priest Holmes and Jamal Lewis both ran for over 80 yards, so that was kind of their bread and butter this game, but nonetheless, a solid one. Then we have later in the year, the Ravens are taking on the Dallas Cowboys. Now, it may seem impressive because Troy Aikman and Emmitt Smith are still here, but this was when the Cowboys were starting to kind of, take a back seat. They were 4-6, so they weren't terrible, but they also weren't what they used to be. And Troy Aikman was terrible this game. Emmitt Smith did little to nothing, and even though Trent Dilfer threw 2 interceptions, he also threw 2 touchdowns, over 240 yards. Jamal Lewis had himself a day, and the Ravens would go on to win the game 27-0 for their 4th and final shutout of the 2000 season, cementing that 2000 Ravens defense as one of the best. As I mentioned, they would go on to win the Super Bowl. And they wouldn't have to wait too long for their next shutout, as in 2001, which was Week 15 of 2001, the Ravens shut the Bengals out. Yeah, this is the 3rd time we're already talking about the Bengals, and that's 3 straight years the Ravens shut the Bengals out at least once in their 2 matchups. This one, it was 16-0. Ravens needed that win. They got to 9-5, would eventually make the playoffs, while the Bengals once again weren't a good team, and the Ravens got revenge for the Bengals beating them earlier earlier in the year. But now we go to the second and most recent time the Ravens have been shut out. I don't think many people know this, but the Ravens have current longest streak of games without being shut out. And this one is interesting because it comes against the eventual Super Bowl champion. At least when we were shut out by the Steelers, they were just a playoff team in '97, but the Ravens were having their home opener against the 2002 Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who, like the Ravens, were coming off a tough Week 1 loss and were looking to rebound. And for the Ravens, and at least just Baltimore fans in general, this was kind of a big game because Johnny Unitas had passed away I think it was a day or two before this game, so they were honoring him in that one. But the Ravens honored him by not doing anything. Okay, so I can't say not doing anything. The defense actually did pretty well, not allowing a single touchdown, but the Bucs defense had a interception return and a safety, while they had a punt return touchdown, and they would go on to win the game 25-0. Like I said, this is the most recent the Ravens have been shut out, and although they've been close a couple of times, it hasn't happened since Week 2 of 2002. But now we're getting back, and the rest of this video is just going to be the Ravens shutting out their opponents. As in Week 16 of 2003, the Ravens traveled to Cleveland and obliterated them 35-0. Now, the Ravens must have been angry because the week before this, they were coming off a disappointing, upsetting loss against the Oakland Raiders, who only had 3 wins up until that point. So the Ravens needed this win, and they got the win to get to 9-6. They clinched the AFC North then and there, so they clinched a playoff berth. And really, the scoring didn't really take place till the fourth quarter. I mean, they scored in the second, were up 7-0 at halftime, were up 14-0 entering the third, but then the Ravens had 3 touchdowns. Jamal Lewis ended up running for 205 yards, which, if you don't remember, this was the year that in Week 2, he ran for 295 yards against Cleveland, which was the NFL record. So in 2 games against the Browns this year, Jamal Lewis ran for 500 of his 2,066 yards. Most of it came in the second half in this game, but still impressive nonetheless. Then we'd have to wait a little while, as the Ravens nor their opponents would get shut out until Week 1 of 2006, and this is against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. This time, instead of being shut out by them, the Ravens went on the road in Tampa, shut them out 27-0. Now, this was interesting for the Ravens because at this point, I believe they were on an 11 or 12 game losing streak on the road, and the Buccaneers were coming off a playoff season and a division championship the year before at 11-5. So the Bucs were kind of seen as like up-and-comers, whereas the Ravens, they were seen to improve because they had traded for quarterback Steve McNair, and that would actually come this season. They would improve, as it started out with this 27-0 victory, where the Ravens passed the ball efficiently, they ran the ball well, they had a defensive score, while Tampa did little to nothing. The Ravens would go on to go 13-3, but this wouldn't be their last shutout of the year. Fast forward to Week 12 of that season, and the Ravens are at home this time, and they're taking on the defending Super Bowl champion Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, what was big about this game, though, was the Steelers weren't necessarily good in 2006. They were 4-6 entering this game. They had turnover machine Ben Roethlisberger, who led the NFL in interceptions heading into this game, and he just got beat up. We sacked him 9 times. Bart Scott put a hit on Ben Roethlisberger, and Roethlisberger to this day says it's the hardest he's ever been hit. I mean, the Steelers couldn't do anything. They passed the ball here and there, but they only ran it 11 times for 21 yards. McNair was again efficient, and the run game did just enough to win the game, and they had a defensive touchdown. So both of the Ravens shutouts in 2006 were by scores of 27-0. But again, that would be the last Ravens shutout for a while, as in 2007 or 2008, they didn't record a shutout nor get shut out. But this time in 2009, on Monday Night Football, the Ravens went into Cleveland and shut the Browns out. Now, this is one of the more uglier shutouts the Ravens have had, I should say, because heading into halftime of this game, the score was 0-0. Yeah, I don't know what was going on, but nobody seemed to want to score. Now, it wasn't necessarily unusual that the Browns had 0 points heading into halftime, because they had, it was either one of the worst or the worst offense in the league. I mean, Brady Quinn started this game, if that's what you need to know here. And all 16 of the points the Ravens would end up scoring came in the third quarter. They had an offensive touchdown, and then just a play later after the kickoff, a pick 6 by Duane Landry. The extra point would kind of be botched, so they wouldn't even be able to get it off. And then Cundiff added a field goal late in the third quarter, and the Ravens would end up getting the 16-0 win, and again, probably their ugliest shutout win that they've ever had. But then it would really be a while before the Ravens got a shutout, because their next shutout would be 8 years later. Not saying that they weren't close during those 8 years, but we gotta fast forward. It's another week 1 game, 2017. The Ravens are in Cincinnati against the Bengals. What makes this shutout so weird is that up until this point, the Bengals had beaten the Ravens like 5 of the last 6 or 6 of the last 7 times, and the Ravens hadn't won a game in Cincinnati since I think it was like 2012 or 2011 or something like that. So to come in and win, it wasn't necessarily improbable, but most people weren't seeing that. A lot of people had the Bengals winning this game, but Andy Dalton threw 4 interceptions, and even though Joe Flacco's stats weren't fantastic, he was basically playing injured in this game, so he just kind of had to play game manager. He only threw 1 interception to Dalton's 4. The Ravens were able to get a 20-0 victory, with mainly the offense running the ball and the defense just forcing turnovers left and right. It's one of the weirder shutouts, I should say, in team history, because it kind of came out of nowhere, but this won't be the last time we see the Bengals in shutout when we talk about them and the Ravens. That's foreshadowing, but yeah, after waiting 8 years to get their next shutout, the Ravens would actually have 3 in 2017, which is the second most in a season in franchise history, only behind the 2000 team that had 4. As later in the year, the Ravens were 3-4. They were kind of struggling. They were taking on the 4-2 Miami Dolphins, who were without Jay Cutler in this game, and it was Thursday night football, so it was prime time, and this is the Ravens' biggest shutout win to date. Why? Well, because, I mean, they won this game 40-0. And most people forget that Joe Flacco actually played less than half of this game. With the Ravens up 13-0, Joe Flacco went into a slide and Kiko Alonso clearly hit him late, and Joe Flacco would be taken out of the game due to concussion protocol, which you would enter Ryan Mallett, RIP, who would play well, throw a couple TD passes. The Ravens defense had a couple of pick sixes in the game as well from Jimmy Smith and CJ Mosley. So it was just a complete win overall for Baltimore, and again, their biggest shutout win to date. But their third and last shutout in the 2017 season was an impressive one, because the Ravens heading into this game against the Packers had never won at Lambeau Field, and the only time they beat the Packers was in Monday night in 2005 in Baltimore, that 48-3 victory that they had. This time, though, the Ravens weren't seeing Aaron Rodgers. He was out for the season, and we were seeing Brent Hundley, and Hundley did throw for 239 yards, but the big thing was he threw 3 interceptions. Joe Flacco, again, was good, not great, just kind of more efficient, and the offense did enough to get the Ravens a 23-0 win, which got them back to 500 and would help them kind of down the line get into a win-and-in situation right at the end of the year, which you would all know the Ravens wouldn't win that, but it was a pretty big win to say the least, and to take advantage of Aaron Rodgers not being in the Packers lineup, it was huge. And then the very next year in 2018, the Baltimore Ravens would travel to Tennessee to take on the Titans. Now, the Titans had beaten the Ravens in both 2016 and 2017, so the Ravens were looking to stop that right away, and this game is infamous because this is when the Ravens set a franchise record for sacks in a game. Before that, the Ravens record for sacks on an opposing QB was 9, which was the game in 2006 against Roethlisberger I mentioned, and Thanksgiving of 2011 when the Ravens sacked Alex Smith 9 times. The Ravens would sack Marcus Mariota 11 times. Because you look at Mariota's stats, he was 10 of 15 for 117 yards, but he just couldn't get a lot of those throws off. Derrick Henry, too, I think he only had like 21 yards on 7 carries, so this was one of the times we were actually able to have him not do anything. And again, Joe Flacco, efficient day, hit Michael Crabtree for a touchdown. Alex Collins had a couple of rushing TDs, and that was all the Ravens needed for a 21-0 victory over Tennessee. But now we're getting to the final shutout of this video, and most recent one for the Ravens, is after that shutout in 2018, the Ravens again went on a long streak of not having shutouts. Again, a couple of close calls, like Christmas of 2024 when the Ravens beat the Texans 31-2. Technically, the defense didn't give up those points, but it's not a shutout because they didn't finish with 0 points on the board. Instead, we're going to last season, and what makes this game so weird is how bad the Ravens' defense was. Like, all these other years that we have talked about, the Ravens' defense was really good, or, you know, still top 10, not necessarily what they used to be, but top 10-ish. But This one, yeah, the Ravens defense was terrible, and somehow they shut out Joe Burrow and the Cincinnati Bengals. It makes no sense to me. This one is the most unusual shutout just because of how it happened. Because just 2 weeks prior, on Thanksgiving, the Bengals came into Baltimore, forced 5 turnovers, and beat the Ravens 32-14. Now, granted, they only scored, I think, 2 touchdowns that whole entire game. The rest were field goals. But they beat the snot out of us. And we're coming into this game 6-7. We're on a 2-game losing streak. And 6-7. I'm sorry, that was brain rot. I shouldn't have done that. But the Ravens had a record of 6 wins and 7 losses, and we're on a 2-game losing streak, and they really needed to win this game. But nobody really knew what to expect, whether we were going to get a high-scoring game or a close game or a blowout, and well, we got a blowout, just in a very unusual fashion. The Ravens in this game only ran about 40 plays. Jackson only threw it 12 times, completing 8 of those passes for 150 yards with 2 touchdowns and an interception. And Derrick Henry carried it 11 times for 100 yards, while Mitchell also had 9 carries for 66 yards. So the Ravens were highly efficient because even though they didn't have that many plays, they had 317 yards of offense. The Bengals, they ran the ball pretty well. They had 100 rushing yards. Joe Burrow threw the ball a lot, but he had 2 costly interceptions, and one was late in the game with the Ravens up 17-0. It looked like the Bengals were going to drive down the field and, if not get a touchdown, at least get on the board and get a field goal. But Kyle Van Noy picks the pass off and hands it off to Aloy Gilman, who then proceeds to take it the rest of the way for a touchdown, and the rest is history. The Ravens won 24-0 for their most recent shutout, their 13th in team history, and it still baffles my mind that somehow, someway, a Zach Orr defense was able to hold a team to 0 points. But sometimes, I guess, sometimes you just get lucky, or sometimes you just have that one game where everything goes your way when you want it to go your way, and it works the way you want it to. But so far, in the Ravens' history, those are the 15 times that they have been a part of shutouts. And like I said, only shut out twice. I've never seen them be shut out. I've been watching them since 2006, so I'm kind of glad that when I've watched them, I've at least been able to see them put some points on the board. But you would think with a team that had a shady quarterback history before Joe Flacco and Lamar Jackson that they would have been shut out way more, but nope. But hey, they're known for good defense, so they have quite a bit of shutouts in their short history at times. But that's it for me. Tell me in the comments below, which one of these shutouts by the Ravens do you think is the most interesting, and which one do you think was the most sloppy shutout of them all? Because again, not all shutouts are dominating. There's times where the offense just doesn't really do much, but the defense is able to hold things down. And as long as the offense just doesn't screw up, then you win the game, which in this case happened a few times with the Ravens in these shutouts. And which one was the most dominating, do you think? It could be that 40-0 win versus the Dolphins, but maybe there's another shutout the Ravens had where you looked and said, that was the most dominant I think they've ever looked when shutting an opponent out. But yeah, until then, that's it for me. Stay safe out there, and I will catch you all in the next one.